Merlin is an app to help you identify the birds that you find. And at its heart is the sound identification. And that sound identification is really quite magical. So my name's Stephen Menzies. I'm a project leader for Cornell University Lab of Ornithology's Merlin app. If you take a look at some of the published literature and you take, for example, the call of a great tit, you can see the call of a great tit written down, described 20, 30 different ways in 20 or 30 different books. And how you're able to transcribe that into the field is often very difficult. If you start birding with a birding mentor, then you have somebody who's able to point out in the field, that's a great tit, that's a chaffinch. Many people don't have that luxury of being able to go birding with somebody who already has that knowledge. And so we see Merlin almost as a sort of birding buddy in your pocket. We don't expect Merlin to be able to take you all the way, but what we hope is it will give you those hints and that help to get you there. And it will offer opportunities to people who don't have the chance to go birding with other people, or they're coming at it from stage zero and want to gain a little more knowledge. My favorite bird song ties in with one of the migrants that's just arrived outside. For me, my favorite bird and my favorite song is the common redstart. The common redstart is a particularly beautiful bird. The males have got this black throat and, as the name implies, this red tail. For me, it's often not about the song itself, but rather it's about the experience around it. The redstart song is pretty nice and it's pretty interesting. It contains mimicry, and you can use that mimicry to sort of track the bird's migration. You hear some mimicry in the song that is familiar. This bird here was imitating a house sparrow earlier, but you also hear songs in there that you're not familiar with, and these are birds maybe from the Middle East or from Africa. But the song itself is not particularly sort of beautiful or celebrated, but for me, it's waking up on a sunny morning with the window cracked open and just hearing that bird singing for the first time in the year and celebrating its return. To date, we've got 36 million downloads of the app. So we're reaching far beyond just birders and people who are interested in birds. We're reaching, in many parts of the world, general public who may want to further their knowledge of birds, or maybe didn't even know what birds were around in their area at all. Fundamentally, we want to see a world where birds are conserved and protected. And to undertake that protection, you have to have a knowledge of the subject. We want there to be more birders in the world. We think more birders leads to a better world, fundamentally. And this can be birds of any level. Last year in the UK, 1 in 28 people had Merlin on their phone. And even if each of those only makes a small improvement to what they do, maybe planting a native bush in their garden or going and helping on a local nature reserve, if 1 in 28 people is doing something because they've learned something through Merlin about the birds in their local area, we think that's having a positive impact that can be replicated right across the country and beyond.
Feeding birds brings us closer to nature, but new research from the RSPB shows it can also spread disease. So, the advice is changing. Feed safely and feed seasonally. Here's one of our Get Birding experts to explain more.
My name is Megan McCubbin and I'm an RSPB ambassador. And if you've been looking into the news, you'll have noticed recently that there are new updated guidelines from the RSPB detailing and asking us to change the way we're feeding the birds. Now, this comes, I think, as a bit of a shock to most people. It's a bit of a surprise. It's something I've personally done since I was a child. So to have this massive change feels like quite a big deal. But when you look at the data and the science that has come out of a lot of research, it's really clear why. So what the RSPB are now asking is that we remove our bird feeders with seeds and nuts from May the 1st to the 31st of October. And that's all because of quite a new disease, a protozoan parasite called trichomoniasis. It's a really nasty disease. It creates lesions in the back of the throats for lots of birds. It's known in doves, pigeons, even birds of prey. But in 2005, it became really prevalent in our finches. So they've declined about 60% in the last few years, which is a shocking statistic, and it is down to trichomoniasis. And it's really prevalent in the summer. It's spread when birds share food or water, but seeds and nuts especially, because you know how birds pick up a seed and they'll weigh it in their bill to decide if the time taken to eat it is going to be worth the nutritional value of that seed. So a lot of birds, you watch it if you watch your feeders closely, they'll pick up a seed and they'll drop it to the floor. And finches love to come and feed on the floor, which is one of the reasons why they're struggling so much with the disease, because they're changing saliva with multiple birds. It doesn't survive long outside the body. It can desiccate this parasite and dry up. So in the winter months when the temperatures are colder, trichomoniasis struggles to survive. So just while the disease is incredibly prevalent, it's one of these things that is sad for us because we love feeding the birds. It's a way of connecting and engaging with nature. But at the same time, if it's causing them harm, it's got to be about them. What we can do, though, in the summer months is we can occasionally scatter feed mealworms. Mealworms are a great source of protein for birds, but move it around. So if you do it in one area of your garden one week, perhaps if you do it the following week, change the location of where those mealworms are. You can also occasionally put out fat balls. Fat balls are, again, a great source of energy, great for the winter, but also sometimes in the spring when they're going through breeding. I might still put mine out occasionally, maybe once every week or 2 weeks. And the key thing is we make sure that if we see a bird that looks unwell, and the way to tell if a bird has trichomoniasis is they often look like they've got fluffed up feathers. Sometimes they look wet around the bill. There can be food stuck to their bill, and they're really lethargic. So they're often really sleepy. You can get much closer to a bird with trichomoniasis than if it didn't have it, because they stay on the ground and they don't look very well at all. But they're actually, unfortunately, they can't keep food down. So whilst they look fluffed up, they're actually not getting enough nutrients in their body, which is why most of them die of starvation. But if you see one that doesn't look well, remove the food immediately, give it a break, wait for a few months before putting it back out again. There's all things we can do. We haven't been doing it wrong. We just need to adapt the way that we're feeding the birds and change how we look after them. We can still look after them in so many ways. We could plant seeds into our garden that create amazing life for pollinators that birds love to feed on. We can create natural food sources that bring birds into our garden in a different way. That's a fantastic alternative to do that benefits not just birds, but all wildlife.
The dawn chorus happens in the early hours. If you're up, you'll notice how it builds.
If you've ever gone out and listened to it, it starts slow, and as the sort of light turns up, the sound turns up as well, like an orchestra sort of tuning up.
Starting with just a few voices, then quickly filling the air with others.
Blackbirds and robins are the early singers, and it's believed that's because they have bigger eyes, so they can see more in that dim early light. So then other birds with the smaller eyes come in later, like your wrens and finches. Whitethroats, willow warblers, they're all arriving back, many of them from Africa. They've made these amazing journeys to get here, and then they're just singing their hearts out.
The air's cooler and stiller at dawn, so sound carries further, 20 times further compared to later in the day.
So in the clear morning air, birds can be heard. There's not as much traffic noise or other noises to compete with. So that's one of the reasons they sing at dawn. And the other reason is for safety. So if you're singing very loudly, it's not a great idea if you're trying to stay hidden from predators. So using that dim morning light just before the sun's come up allows a small, quite vulnerable bird to stay hidden and sing really loudly and tell all the other birds that they're there, but without advertising their presence too much to the neighbourhood sparrowhawk.
And by the time the sun's properly up, you've got a full chorus.
I'm Jenny Shelton. I work for the Wildlife Trusts. We're a federation of 46 charities and one central charity working hard to protect the habitat that birds and other wildlife need to tackle the climate crisis and really make nature part of everybody's lives. And our planet is changing. The countryside and the landscapes around us are changing, and that's having an effect on birds and nature. And it's meaning that birdsong is dimming. Our grandparents weren't just being nostalgic, or even our parents, weren't just being nostalgic when they said there was more birdsong in their day. Like, you might have noticed that yourself, that it does seem to have dimmed a little since we can remember in recent decades. The Wildlife Trust are trying to reverse that and bring birdsong back, bring nature back, and everyone wins. It's for everybody's benefit. That's the other thing I think to mention, is that birdsong, although it sounds so beautiful to us, it isn't for us. It's, serious business for birds. They are singing for their survival. They are singing for the right to reproduce. And it would be such a travesty for birdsong to dim and disappear. And there are certain birds that we're focusing on in particular, things like nightingales and turtle doves, for instance. Numbers have just absolutely crashed, I think by about 90% in some cases. Nightingales, of course, one of the big stars of the dawn chorus. There's a reason that people go mad for a nightingale. Like, they honestly sound astonishing. If you ever hear, well, it's unmistakable. I remember going looking for a nightingale once, and I was sort of creeping about in this little scrubby woodland, and I could hear something. I was like, is that the nightingale? Is it just sort of tuning up? But it was a song thrush. And then I heard this burst of sound, so strong, so powerful, and absolute vocal gymnastics. I just like, yeah, that's the nightingale. You can't mistake it. It sounds like it's swallowed a Mozart manuscript. It just does something to your soul. It's so joyful and just, powerful. And it's like tapping into this secret language.
My name is Andrea Michelli. I'm a professor of early intervention in mental health at King's College London. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've worked in the NHS for several years. And one thing I did notice is that when people move from the countryside to London, where I worked, often they will struggle with their mental health. And this is something that is reflected in the literature. People who live in cities are more vulnerable to developing mental health issues. So I wanted to understand why. What we found was that when people heard birdsong or they saw birds, their stress level would decrease and their mood would improve. And there's also an aspect which to me was a little surprising, but they also felt less lonely. Even if there weren't other people around, they still felt less lonely after seeing birds or hearing birdsong. So these are improvements in mental well-being that people experience immediately, but they also accumulate over time and can even protect people from changes in their mood or experiencing high levels of stress. The improvement in stress and mood perhaps were expected, but the fact that people felt less lonely, I think that's interesting because we often think that loneliness is about lack of people, but maybe loneliness can be a lack of the natural world around us. For me, it's really important to work with policy stakeholders to disseminate the findings as widely as possible so people are aware that this is very much an untapped resource, something that is very accessible to us. So my research right now focuses on the mental health benefits of nature. I'm also very interested in climate change because, of course, climate change affects everything. We also find that nature can help mitigate the negative impacts of climate change, for example, extreme heat and air pollution, which I've started to write about in a Substack called Wild Minds. So if anyone is interested in the interplay between climate change, the natural world, and mental health, they can find out more by subscribing to Wild Minds on Substack.
I'm Professor Anne Goodenough. I work at the University of Gloucestershire, where I'm an applied ecologist. I teach the next generation of ecologists and conservationists, and I'm passionate about anything in the natural world, but especially birds. There's actually two really simple rules as far as starlings are concerned to avoid bumping into one another. The first is that every individual starling keeps the same distance apart from its neighbouring starlings, and that's the starlings in front and behind, above and below, left and right. And that's not a set distance. It's just that every individual bird is keeping the same distance apart from all of its neighbours at the same time. And what that means is that if one bird goes right, then the next bird will have to go right to keep the same distance, and then the next bird will have to go right to keep the same distance, and so on. So you get effectively a really useful form of self-organisation just from one really simple rule. That works for a lot of the murmuration physics and dynamics, but at some point, if you're watching murmurations, you might see a murmuration split and then come back together. And obviously then at some point, birds have got to make a decision about where they go. And you then get a second rule that comes into play, which is to sort of aim for areas where the density of birds is kind of middling. You don't want to aim for areas that have got very few birds. In other words, you don't want to go outside of the murmuration and just aim for sky. Equally, you don't want to just go for great density of birds, because if you take that to extremes, the murmuration would basically implode. And they are much better at keeping equal distance apart than humans are. An awful lot of traffic jams, for example, start particularly on motorways where one person gets too close to the person in front and puts their brakes on, and then the next person does the same thing. And then before you know it, the sort of dynamics of people driving along the motorway is fundamentally altered because somebody hasn't obeyed that simple rule of making sure they've got enough space to the person in front. Starlings don't do that. Starlings are much, much better than humans when it comes to obeying that rule of sensible and equal distance. Why does it happen? Several different ideas, and in all honesty, it's probably a little bit of a combination. One is the idea of warmer together. So, as I say, these happen autumn and winter. It's much warmer to roost as part of a large roost of birds rather than a small roost of birds or on your own. So one concept is that it might be the fact that the murmuration is effectively an advertisement for where the roost is going to be. So the murmuration just signpoints the roost. So you get multiple birds performing this aerial display, this ballet of the skies above a roost site. Usually starting at or around sunset and going on until it's basically too dark to really see what they're doing any longer. And you get what I call the down the plug hole movement, where one bird goes down and literally all of the others sort of swirl down and go down over that same point, and that becomes the overnight roost. And some of the research that I've been involved in has found that murmurations are bigger and last longer when it's colder. Probably a bigger driver is around predation. So when birds are going down to roost, they are quite vulnerable. Birds of prey will always hunt by getting focus lock on a bird. So they don't just sort of fly in with open talons and, do the best job they can. They very much try and pinpoint, as you would with shooting a missile. You pinpoint the target and you go in after the target. If birds are moving as part of a 3D swirling mass of birds, it's much harder to get focus lock for a bird of prey, and therefore starlings are safer. So you've got sort of two competing ideas, and I think it's probably a combination of the two, either warmer together or safer together.
If you love birdwatching, why not join the Flock, our Get Birding Members Club? Enjoy exclusive content, latest birding news, ad-free episodes, and access to community chat rooms to share tips, spots, and more with birders around the world. Go to our website, getbird.ing.